With us is Minister for Social Development and Education, Minister Deanne Kentish-Rogers, Ministerial Assistant in the Ministry of Finance, Courtney Morton. We have our liaison to the Spanish community, Ms. Jeanette Guzman Lamontang, our Public Relations Officer, Ivan Connor. And then the media, welcome. We have with us Felicia Hennis from Radio Anguilla, Lloyd Gums from Lloyd Live, etc. We have Dawn Hodge and Brenda Carty from the Daily Herald. Dr. Joy, who is representing the Anguillian newspaper. And earlier I saw Monique Webster, but she seems to have disappeared. And of course we have Dietz, Alrand and the gang who keep us online, on track, and they are wherever we are here at the House of Assembly and wherever we have activities. I want to apologize for the absence of the Parliamentary Secretary, Ms. Quincia Gomes-Marie, who is right now in Glasgow, Scotland, representing Anguilla and the overseas territories at the COP26, which is the environmental conference, where she'll be presenting and as a panelist will also be negotiating for finance to mitigate the effects of climate change. And she's doing an important work, and as the minister likes to say, she can't come down. So before we get started, also in the building is the Minister for Economic Development, Natural Resources, Information Technology, Mr. Kyle Hodge, and he'll be with us shortly. And want to thank you all for coming out. Thank you, the listeners and viewers, Anguillians here and in the diaspora. Before we move on, I'll ask our resident Reverend Minister Kenneth Hodge to lead us in a word of prayer.
Thank you, Premier. Dear Lord, we come before you this afternoon giving you thanks and praise for giving us life and strength and hope and opportunity for yet another day. We ask that you continue to bless us, bless the people of Anguilla, continue to lay healing hands upon those who are sick and afflicted, and protect those who are charged with protecting our island, our health workers, our police officers, and all others. We ask these blessings before your name. Amen.
Thank you, Minister. I just want to say, congratulations to Bishop L. Errol Brooks of the Anglican Church on the occasion of his 70th birthday and also his retirement. He has done great work in the community for the Anglican parishes and the diocese, and wish him the best as he charts a new course. Want to say that what's important is the COVID-19. It is real. It has devastating effects. We've had one death, and we just want to thank God for his divine providence throughout almost 2 years now that this pandemic has caused the world to stop and to take a look at itself. On Friday we had 111 positive cases in Anguilla. I'm sure we'll get an update in a little bit. But I want to say, let's remember those who are afflicted with the disease here and abroad, those who have passed, pray for their souls, and we also pray for their families that they find comfort. We pray for those right now who are dealing with family members who are in severe and near dying, that they realize that the effects of this virus, can lead to death. And every time someone dies, that a lot of us are affected by that. And even though we have decided that we are not going to lock down the country, we're not going into curfews, we want to stress personal responsibility. We all are responsible for our own selves, but also for those around us, our brothers and sisters, our parents, our grandparents, our children, those who are vulnerable. And so masks, hygiene, social distancing, and then the vaccine, and these are all important tools to fight this pandemic. And you can't rely on government to always protect you. You have to take some responsibility, and I'm sure that we'll get into that later. So right now, I'd like to turn over to the Permanent Secretary for Health. We call him the General because he has been, leading the charge so that we can control and mitigate against this deadly disease. Mr. Rogers, it's good to see you back.
Thank you very much, Premier. I'm going to ask the Chief Medical Officer to present the current status, and then after that, I'll make some comments.
Good afternoon. So I'll make my comments as clear and to the point as possible. So a lot has happened since the last time we've met here. You note that with our twice weekly updates, press releases, that we've continued to see or increase in active cases and whatnot. On the global scene, it's not that much different. We reached the grim milestone of over 247 million cases worldwide, with over 5 million deaths. And you'll hear us now, from time to time, reiterate the fact that what has changed dramatically since the beginning of this, maybe a year ago to now, is the concept, a huge paradigm shift that we are still grappling with in terms of our response and our expectations. The fact that we are now looking at having cases of the virus. I think all countries have now abandoned an elimination approach. That said, as the Premier said, is not to say we're throwing caution to the wind, but it's just to recognize that we're in a different place. And to grasp the reality in terms of, especially since the advent of the Delta variant, that things are very different from what we imagined them to be a year ago or what we imagined them to be able to achieve at this point. But there are still lots of things we can do to maximize our situation. They always say in every disappointment there is opportunity. We can still keep our numbers in check. Through vaccination and the other measures, we can still ensure that we lose as few persons as possible and minimize the deaths and hospitalizations as much as possible, and we see how vaccination can be a critical part of that. But now we have other huge factors at play, which are the economic pressures and just the fact that society has to get on. I always said from the beginning, if we were like bears that could hibernate, this would be a lot easier. But we're not that way. We're social beings, and we also have our economies to worry about and so on. So public health, I think, never before, or maybe not in recent history, has faced such seemingly opposing pressures and challenges than we have before, and we've just had to learn to evolve and change with the times and evolve with the times. So that said, the Caribbean is also in the throes of the Delta variant. We're seeing increases everywhere. Anguilla has been no different, unfortunately. And so I have bits and pieces of data, which is a mixture of today's update, the weekend's update, and the last comprehensive kind of monthly synopsis that we do. So as of midday today, we have confirmed 40 new cases. That brings us to a total of having confirmed 984 cases since the beginning of this pandemic. There have been 42 recoveries, 874 total recoveries, 109 active cases to date. Over the weekend, we had 2 discharges from the hospital, but 3 admissions. So that now there are 8 persons currently admitted to the isolation unit. At least 7 out of 8 you can say are for COVID symptoms proper. And last week we saw 1 person flown out on ventilator, an unvaccinated individual. We are still maintaining high test positivity rates. We're looking at the proportion of tests that we do that are coming up positive. Ideally, or prior to this paradigm shift, you would want that number to be, that percentage to be under 5%. We're at 11%. It could be greater, but it could certainly could be less, right? So we're still seeing that. And we have maintained that higher positivity rate for the last 3 weeks, I would say. Around 11% of our cases, of our PCR tests are coming back positive. We're still importing cases, but decidedly our issue right now is local transmission and community transmission. Further to last time we met, we also saw a new category of transmission. We saw a few cases in the schools that forced an extension of the closure of the schools for the break. And we'll talk about the way forward and what other countries are grappling with and strategies being proposed. As a matter of fact, we have some consultants coming in tonight, Public Health England. Among one of the areas they'll be discussing is what are the approaches to school to maintain schools open, as we know that this is not going anywhere, right? So in terms of the transmission category and in terms of the pattern of transmission, we are still looking overwhelmingly at household transmission, over 50%, along with social contacts, about 60%. But since the last time we met, we went from having fewer than under 20% of persons with no link to a cluster or recent history of travel to around 25% last week, and hence the formal classification change. WHO PAHO informed us, along with BVI and not BVI, sorry, Bermuda and Cayman, that we'd be changing to community transmission. Recall that before that, maybe a month or so before, the CDC had upgraded us to level 3. We're still at level 3 up to today. Then just looking at our pattern of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, we've started to see a distinction as well, in that at the moment around 54% of our cases are unvaccinated, while 46% are vaccinated. Further to that, we reported before, and we've seen the same sustained sort of high proportion of unvaccinated minors, around 30% of cases overall, and 53% of cases among the unvaccinated. Among the men and women who are eligible for vaccination, the adults, we see 66% of the females are vaccinated and 62% of the males are vaccinated. Looking at our hospitalized cases, if we look at the current 7, you can say for Florida or COVID symptoms proper, 3 are fully vaccinated and 5 are unvaccinated. Note that at least 5 have underlying risk factors for severe COVID. In general, we've seen a pattern where the underlying factors for COVID include diabetes, especially, and older age, and other conditions as well, hypertension and so on, but overwhelming is diabetes. So of the admissions, we have 3 unvaccinated females, 3 fully vaccinated males, and 2 unvaccinated males. There's a wide age range, ranging from 29 to 89. 4 are over the age of 65 years old. And then looking back, crude and dirty, because I have some data cleaning to do, over about 22 admissions for COVID since August, we found that 8 were fully vaccinated and 14 are unvaccinated, including 1 minor. Of course, that's almost double in terms of unvaccinated to vaccinated. That's not unusual, and that's really, really consistent with the global picture where you're seeing overwhelmingly hospitalized cases and severe cases, more so among the unvaccinated persons. Just to recall also that age is a factor, as I mentioned before. We see more severe disease in persons 60 and older, and of course with the underlying conditions. The only thing I'd point out is that at least 3 of these persons that have been hospitalized, age 35, 45, and 38, actually do not have any underlying risk factors and all happen to be unvaccinated. We always, when we're doing data analysis and epidemiology and whatnot, we always look at big groups, bigger numbers for what we call more robust data. In the States and even in the UK, it has been seen consistently the much higher hospitalization rate among the unvaccinated. And a recent study in the States have shown that further to that, the unvaccinated there have had an 11 times higher fatality rate than those vaccinated. And further, that the vaccinated persons were 10 times less likely to be admitted to hospital, 5 times less likely to be infected than unvaccinated persons. And then noting that they talk about boosters and where we are to date, looking at the booster campaign, I think the PS will elaborate more on that. We'll be getting a tranche of vaccines very soon. Noting, of course, that efficacy also declines with age, and they say after 6 to 8 months, you can do your booster. The good news about that is that efficacy in terms of infection, you find a higher infection rate. However, in terms of preventing severe disease and death, the vaccinations are still performing extremely well, even 6 to 8 months after the fact, after the vaccination. I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Chief Medical Officer. Maybe I should take this off a bit. Thank you so much, Premier, for your welcome back. I know I've been out for a while. In fact, I've been off island for about 2 months, dealing with some health issues that I had. I want to thank members of the public and certainly members of the government and the civil service who have really supported me over the last 2 months to ensure that I have been doing well. And I'm back on the island now since I came into quarantine on Sunday, last Sunday, and right back into work on Monday of last week. So we have been looking at things in the Ministry of Health, and I want to thank the Chief Medical Officer and other members of staff as well who have been working so hard in my absence to ensure that we keep the country safe. I just want to mention a couple of things. The Chief Minister, the Premier, mentioned a personal responsibility. I think we can't stress this enough. I think for the last 2 years we have been doing a lot in terms of the ministry, in terms of ensuring that people had the correct information, in terms we were able to get vaccinations in since February 5th, I think was the first day we did vaccinations. And we were able to vaccinate over almost 10,000 people with first doses and a little over 9,200 with second doses. Still some way to go, but I think we came a long way in ensuring that persons had access the vaccination. We also did a lot of testing. We did over 50,000 tests over the last 2 years here in Anguilla, testing people for coming in quarantine, leaving, and so forth, to ensure we had a good picture of the epidemiology of the virus on island. We also spent quite a bit of money in human resources and other resources. Our budget for this year is going to run up like $1.6 million in the Ministry of Health, above and beyond our normal budgets for regular health cases, regular health programs. So that is about 1.6. It's going to end up more than that. So I'm going to mention a few other initiatives we have to employ now to ensure that we get our test positivity rate down below the 10%, because 10% is just too high. And we're going to speak a little bit about how we think that is happening in short measure. So in addition to the vaccinations, in addition to the testing, in addition to ensuring that we had persons quarantined, to ensure that the virus was isolated early, in addition to ensuring that our hospital was up and ready, in addition to ensuring that we were able to get out as much public information as possible to the people of Angola to ensure that they protect themselves, proper respiratory hygiene, washing hands, hand sanitizer, and so forth. We were able to keep the virus at bay for a very long time. But we've always mentioned at these press conferences that once we open up, once we have our economy open to the outside world, there would be positive cases coming in. We always said that. And the idea would be to not only control the positive cases, but control them while we keep the country open. There's no two ways about it. I mean, there's one country in the Pacific Ocean, they got their first case today. Tonga, right? And they got that case from New Zealand. So no matter how you try to keep this thing at bay, it is just not possible. People are moving, people are traveling. You cannot keep your country shut down forever. In fact, those countries that try to eliminate it, that try to keep an elimination strategy, have now said, look, our strategy is now going to be containment. And of course, Australia is one of those countries. So even those small countries that have kept themselves inoculated, so to speak, are shut off from the outside world, are now experiencing the fact that they really can't stop this thing from coming in because people have to move. And in particular, a country like Anguilla, where our economy is based on tourism, our economy is based on the movement of people. And not only the movement of people, but the movement of people from countries of very high prevalence. Most of our tourists come from the United States of America. That's just the way it is. Right? So we have to ensure that our strategies are centered around containing the virus to ensure that we can keep our borders open, to ensure that people can trade, businesses can trade, people can work, and the country can function. So we have done all we have could in terms of getting our structure in place, getting equipment in place. We have a testing capacity now that's up and running, ensuring that we have, we just hired 2 new technologists, one from Guyana and one from Jamaica. So we've increased our human resources at hospital to ensure that we get our tests out. We've extended the lab to ensure that we can test more for viruses and so forth, in particular, coronavirus. So we have done what we think any government or any Ministry of Health should do in terms of protecting its public. There now must be a concomitant responsibility of the community. There's a need for us to be wearing masks when masks are necessary. There is a need for us to social distance when social distance is necessary. There is a need for us to keep proper hygiene, as always. In fact, if you look at what's happening worldwide now, the cases of flu and other diseases have plummeted. They're almost down to zero now because of what's happening with corona, where we now are practicing proper hygiene and so forth. But that's that corona is just so infectious in getting from one person to another, in particular the Delta variant as well. And the Delta variant is what has put this whole thing in the mess. Vaccination is a critical aspect of this, and I can't speak about this enough. Vaccination is critical. Do not let the naysayers fool you. The numbers in Anguilla actually speak to what's happening. When you have 56% of your cases are not vaccinated, opposed to 44% who are vaccinated, there's a clear difference. There's a clear difference in the numbers in terms of vaccinated and unvaccinated. If you look at hospitalizations as well, it's almost 2 to 1. For every one person you have there hospitalized who are not vaccinated or vaccinated, you have 2 who are not vaccinated. That's just the figures. And this has been borne out worldwide. In fact, persons who are vaccinated recover more quickly than persons who are not. Right? So we, in the Ministry of Health, we think that we have done as much as we could to ensure that the public is educated, the public is protected, and it's now time for the public to respond. Most of the transmission is still in households. 49% of the transmissions is in households, almost half of it. Another 11% is in social contacts outside of the household. So what we are seeing is living conditions where people are living together in large families, sometimes may not be practicing social distancing, or may not be wearing masks, and we certainly have advised this from some time ago. If you're in multi-generational households, where you have persons who are at risk, and persons who may have diabetes and hypertension and cancers and so forth, it is critical that if you know you're socializing, if you know you may be exposed, if you know that there's some aspect of your activity that may have exposed you, you need to ensure that you protect yourselves in the household to ensure that this does not spread. When 49% of our cases are spreading in the house, that is an issue. That is a significant issue. So we'll be looking certainly at how we can bring this case positivity rate below 10%, because 10% is just too high. Most public health experts will tell you between 2 and 5%. That's acceptable. When you get a test positive of 10%, that speaks to a virus that is uncontrolled, and we need to get back control of this virus. What we're doing in the ministry, have hired more persons for contact tracing. On Friday, we've given some instructions to ensure that we bring on between 5 and 10 more persons to assist with contact tracing, so that we can identify persons early, isolate persons early, to ensure that they do not have the chance to spread. That is critical. We, of course, did not anticipate doing this, but of course, if we are to ensure that we get our test positivity at a lower rate, we have to throw more human resources at it. So we are looking for persons who, some of them can be at associate degree level, or some who have just finished sixth form with science background, who can understand the concepts of viruses and the concepts of disease transmission, concepts of infection and these type of things, and who can sit down and work in some independence to ensure that they can contact trace from one household to the next, from one person to to our next. So we're looking at persons who will be interested in this, and we are inquiring. Those persons contact either myself, the Chief Medical Officer, Twyla Bradshaw, or Rochelle Rogers, or you can contact the ministry at 497-3930. So we're beefing up our contact tracing numbers. That is critical for us to ensure that we identify persons early and we isolate persons earlier. We're also hiring more persons for us to get results out quicker. We had a strategy meeting on Friday at the ministry, and it is critical for us to be able to, because we're doing more tests, because we're doing exponentially more tests than we did in June and July, it means that we need to get these results out quicker. It means that we need to contact people to let them know their status, to ensure that we can isolate those who need to be isolated, and to ensure that those who are not positive, we can tell them early so that the level of anxiety can decrease, because we know people want to get the results rather early. Our isolation ward currently is up to capacity. We, at this point in time, may have to be looking for overflow space, and we have a combination of persons who have tested positive as part of contact tracing, but there are also persons who test positive at a hospital who may not have known they were positive, but anybody who comes to the hospital to be admitted will be tested for COVID, and some persons have tested positive there as well. So we currently have about 7 to 8 persons in the isolation ward. That does not give us any much space for any increase in numbers at the hospital. So we're looking at ways of ensuring that we have overflow capacity. As you know, it is not possible in our current hospital setting to have positive COVID cases in the open ward with other patients because of the prospect of the possibility of contamination, infection, cross-confection from one ward to the next. So we are looking at extending the isolation ward in the other half of the psychiatric ward, and we're looking for space right now where we can put our psychiatric patients in a safe area. These are the issues we're dealing with. These are not simple issues, and these are the issues we keep telling people all the time. When we had our vaccination campaign up and running, we implored people to get vaccinated because we knew that these things would happen. The more people vaccinated, the less we'll have in hospitals or in a difficult state of difficult physical state. So yes, we are filling the capacity, and we are looking at ways as how we can do overflow in the isolation ward right now. I'll let the Chief Medical Officer come back in a second. I'll just mention a little bit about vaccination. We do have over 3,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, which will be coming in on the 3rd of November. So they will be here pretty soon. The 3rd is next 2 days. And those doses are prioritized for children ages 12 to 17, frontline health workers will be getting boosters, and these boosters will be boosters to persons who would have already gone through the 2 doses of AstraZeneca. Adults over 50 years of age will be getting boosters. Adults 16 to 49 who are at risk, immunocompromised, diabetes, lung disease, etc., for boosters. Persons living in residential care facilities for boosters. And first doses of Pfizer for some persons who are interested in getting the first doses, and pregnant women as well, because we now have it approved for pregnant women. If I can go back over those again. School-age children will be getting, these are 1 dose for school-age children aged 12 to 17. They'll be getting their dose in the school system. Frontline health workers will be getting the boosters. Adults aged 50 years and older will be getting the boosters. Adults 16 to 49 who are in at-risk groups, immunocompromised, such as immunocompromised in cancers and so forth, HIV, diabetes, persons with heart disease, lung disease, etc., hypertension and so forth. Persons living in residential care facilities will be getting the boosters. And boosters will be given to persons who would have already had their 2 doses of AstraZeneca. And we also be giving first doses for those persons who are interested and pregnant women. We do have a commitment to get, I think, a little over 5,000 doses, and the first batch will be 3,000 doses. So once we use up this first batch, we will get a second dose. Now, we have had to change our strategy, certainly, for AstraZeneca. For Pfizer, this is a totally different vaccination, totally different technology, total different storage, cold chain. So we've been going through the training with Public Health England since last week. We have been able to identify the sub-zero temperature freezers that we can use. We'll be also using dry ice to get them here. And once we get them here, we save them in our sub-zero temperature of minus 80 degrees. So we still have a lot of work to do. We are getting ready to open the tourist season anytime now. We have changed our strategies for incoming passengers, incoming persons. There'll be no more quarantine. There'll be test on arrival, test after 24, your first test, you'll be released after 24 hours. Persons who are not vaccinated will be still quarantining for up to 10 days and longer if you're positive. And the new regulations allow us to test vaccinated persons at day 4 if the Chief Medical Officer feels it's necessary. She has that authority to request people to come in and be tested on day 4 after arrival for surveillance purposes, and depending on which country you would have come from, because there are certainly some issues we're having with different countries worldwide. So I'm going to ask the Chief Medical Officer, you wanted to make a statement.
Yeah, just a couple more points. Something, just to reinforce what the PS said, the good thing is, and the huge opportunity that Delta variant has presented, and this was corroborated in our last technical meeting on Friday, you're not seeing a lot of asymptomatic transmission. There's a lot of symptomatic people, even when the symptoms are mild. Why I'm saying this, that's an opportunity for prevention. In our experience, even the workplace situations, the school, a couple of kids here and there, invariably somebody has been symptomatic and said, oh, it was mild. And the household, that's very important. Is somebody that had a cough, cold, a sniffle, with that multi-generational household, maybe the symptoms are mild and they didn't take it seriously, and we still keep hearing people saying, I got wet and my sinuses were acting up, then I had a head cold. But that's an opportunity to remind you, maybe I should be washing my hands, maybe I should be putting on my mask, especially in these homes. And there are lots of these multi-generational households around Anguilla. So that's another thing. Listen to your body and pay attention, because if this were a lot of asymptomatic spread, it would be even more difficult, because these things do not necessarily come to us naturally. We don't remember 100% of the time to do what we should do, but it's a clue. I'm having a little something, put on your mask, especially if you live with a grandparent or something like that, right? So that's, to me, a huge opportunity. We would not be here without the help of our international partners. Public Health England, they changed the name. Hopefully I remember it by the next press conference. Yes, they have been a stalwart, CARFA, and also PAHO. And further to that, most recently, maybe last week, we received a tranche of $30,000 to support the short-term additional staff that we will be requiring at least for the next 6 months, let's say to a year, hopefully not, of this response until things get more under control. So those are the points. I talk to colleagues all around the world in epidemiology and public health, and the numbers, I'm actually still quite heartened because of vaccination. Make no mistake, if we had been hit open like this with a lower vaccination coverage, you have only to look around to see what the numbers look like. They're pretty explosive, right? That's because it's even shown, even now with Delta, that vaccinated persons are still 5 times less likely to get the infection. I keep saying it, there's something that we call a reproduction number. Without vaccination, one person that's unvaccinated or one susceptible person that can get sick can infect up to 7 or 8 persons who are similarly vulnerable. That's a lot to take home. So this is peace compared to lots of the other countries. Even when you adjust for population size, look at the vaccination coverage. Look at those who have been hit at a vaccination coverage under 40%. I don't speak, look at it objectively. I'm not making it up, and then come back to me. It's true. I think the vaccination coverage has still done a lot for us, having almost 70%. It could be, the numbers would be a lot more explosive. And that's the talk. I mean, even in the UK, they're talking about big numbers, but fewer hospitalizations and deaths because of vaccination coverage. So this is the state of play. And again, there are bigger challenges and concerns, including economic viability. We can't ignore that because it will affect the health of the nation invariably. And of course, you stand to lose all the gains of decades with poverty and socioeconomic issues and so on. So this is what we are up against. Again, the vaccination and the public health measures are the way to go, and we have to take it in the hand, each of us.
If I can just quickly mention two other strategies we're working on. We will be working with large employers to look at rapid testing on job sites, because it's critical for us to get a good grip on cases as they start to roll. Especially now that we'll be having people moving more quickly. We need to ensure that these large employers, we're going to be meeting with them shortly over the next couple of weeks, ensure that they use the correct tests, ensure that they do have a testing regime in-house to do some periodic testing at staff to ensure that we pick up cases rather early. We also be looking at periodic testing in the schools as well, to ensure that we have a very good grasp of what's happening amongst our young people in the school setting. One of the things you'll notice if you listen to the news, Pfizer has just gotten emergency approval for children ages 5 to 11. More than likely that's going to come to our system as well. As you would see, we lag a little behind because of course we have to wait on the UK to give approval, and what we will be waiting on certainly is to get that approval for the younger children, and then we'll be looking at inoculating our younger children as well at some point in time. COVID is with us for a while. COVID is with us for a while. We have to ensure that we use every weapon, every arrow in our quiver to ensure that we keep our borders open, to ensure that we continue to trade, to ensure that we can protect our people. I'll leave you with this. Anguilla does not pump any oil. We do not mine any gold. We have no vast reserves of bauxite. All we have is sun, sea, and sand. So we have to ensure that when we allow people to come to Anguilla, when we open up, we do it in a very responsible way. There's no way for us to print money. So really and truly, we cannot close our borders willy-nilly. We have to ensure that if we do close our borders at some point in time, it's at a point when we cannot cope. It's at a point when our hospital is overwhelmed. It's a point where our cases are to a point where we cannot control them. We have to ensure that when we close, it is at our last resort. Closing a country is not as easy as it sounds. We lose a lot of revenue, not only that, but we lose a lot of goodwill. So, being our own product tourism and being our own product being people traveling, we want to make sure that our people understand the raft of measures we want to put in place so that people can work together, so that we can have a very good tourist season with as least cases as possible. Thank you, Premier.
As far as the Pfizer vaccine is concerned, I know parents were asked to register children. My first question is, how many were registered? And secondly, the other people who you listed who are who can get it, what is the position with them? Can they register online? Do they need to phone? Or what is the position?
Yeah, our registration system is still up. We never closed the registration system for vaccination. And we're always employing people to go to the vaccination website to register interest. So both there and you can call the ministry and give your name. But yes, you can still register on the website, and people have been registering.
And how many children are registered?
Yeah. Last check was about a little over 200 children.
And we also started sending the consent forms to parents through the school system as well. And just to note, in terms of the boosters, that for persons who received their second dose, it has to be like around 6 months ago. You're looking at persons that completed their dosing in April and May who will be eligible for the booster in November. Okay.
But that is 200 children out of like 1,500?
The estimate was around 1,333, so I don't have the latest figure may have been a week ago, sorry. Somebody else is dealing more directly with that, but.
Yeah, we'll get you the latest figure. But yes, we're looking at a group of about 1,300 students. That will be Campus B and Campus A and well, lower level 6 form, who would not be 18 as yet. So the target is about 1,300 students. Certainly we would hope that we would get as many of them as possible.
And no plan to mandate it?
We're still looking at that. Of course, there are laws on the book that currently mandate certain vaccinations for attending public schools. We know what they are, and COVID can be added to that if needs be.
I have a question that I've been asked, and I've done the research and pretty much know. I mean, I think I know, but you all are the experts. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about natural immunity. There seems to be some folks that think that if they got it and did not get vaxxed, that they don't now need to get the vaccination. Can you talk about that, please?
The guidance is still to get vaccinated because they're saying that the vaccine now, because of the science behind and the research, is more predictable and in terms of the vaccination coverage. And there's also research showing that the reinfection rate because of Delta is higher with those who got the natural infection, right? So yes, there have been different discussions around if you need a full dosing or whatnot, or just a booster dose, and you see that vary by country, but the consensus in the scientific community is that you still should get vaccinated even if you were infected. And of course, you have some persons who are still going the way of natural infection, and that's a real gamble with your life as well. You may or may not, you're at the mercy of the virus, basically. So that's what we say to those folks as well.
The CDC just came out 2 days ago with reports showing that the vaccine immunity is much better than natural immunity. And so that you can look at that up and read it. But they have shown, looking at the data, monitoring antibody levels, that vaccine immunity extends way beyond natural immunity. And the reinfection rate after getting the infection and not being vaccinated is much higher, and easier chance to get serious and severe symptoms and to transmit the disease much easier than those who are vaccinated. So those are the what we'd say are the benefits of being vaccinated. Mild disease and less hospitalization, less death, and less chance of transmitting the virus. We must care about those around us.
Just to add to that, even persons who would have been positive, we implore you, if you have the opportunity, please get vaccinated. Once you would have cleared your symptoms, you can wait probably 3 weeks, 21 to 28 days, and then once you have access to vaccination, please get vaccinated, because that is a higher level of protection. Just for a little more information, there will be a PTA, a virtual PTA tomorrow, and you can look at, I think it's a Facebook, the Education Department Facebook, at 5:30 for students who are interested, parents of students who are interested in getting their children vaccinated. That is parents of children ages 12 to 17. A virtual PTA 5:30 tomorrow. There'll be a question and answer period for parents. And also consent forms have been sent by the schools to parents to urge them to sign these forms and return them. As I mentioned before, the website for registering your interest is beatcovid19.ai/vaccine, the very same website we used before. So we implore you to register. And finally, we have to make sure that we vaccinate as many of our students as possible, because we have to protect the young people.
I have a question about the young and AstraZeneca. We hear so much about the U.S. vaccines that I'm just not sure about AstraZeneca in terms of the frequency for the children. Is it still a 2-shot regime for them, or is it a 1-shot regime for the kids?
You mean Pfizer? Because AstraZeneca has not been. Yeah. Our regime for the kids is a one-shot regime based on the advice from the UK government health system.
Doc, you know me in reference to this question. Now that the but there's a mix and match now with Pfizer, and my people have taken the Chinese vax, and now they have also taken the Pfizer vax. Why can they still can they enter with having the first Chinese and now the Pfizer vax? Why can't they enter Anguilla?
I'll let the CMO answer that one.
So this has been one of the debates. If I can correct yourself in crude terms, yes, there's some guidance on that. We'll just look at that and get back to you on that. There probably will be some revisions. There's recent guidance coming out of the UK in terms of how you assess persons who had an unapproved vaccine before that changed the regime. But we just have to look at that and then make our decision and communicate.
Lloyd, you're a good advocate, and we'll get there as soon as that we're allowed to. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. Mr. Rogers, you just mentioned that Public Health England advised that we administer the one dose of the Pfizer children. Okay, my question I had planned was, basically in the news you're hearing about myocarditis and pericarditis that is found in children after they take the 2 doses of Pfizer. So my question was at the time, what mechanism or treatment do we have in place if children develop any conditions coming from the Pfizer vaccine?
I'll let the CMO address that one.
Yes, that's a very rare side effect. Actually, it's for some reason found more commonly among males. I just pulled it up. I hadn't looked at that statistic in a while. 2 out of every 100,000 persons. Rare side effect and usually treated, symptomatically and supportively with anti-inflammatory meds and so on. Recovery rate's very high. And you also have to compare that against the inflammatory complications of the virus of itself, which is always much higher. So that's something that we look at as well. It's about benefits outweighing risks. It goes back to that story. So that's how those side effects are looked at. We always said medications, vaccines, even you can expect a certain small proportion of side effects, and you have to look at the risk-benefit profile. Persons have also asked, well, if the disease is typically so mild in children, why are we insisting? Because what we've seen with Delta variant is a lot more hospitalizations. I said 300% more hospitalizations among kids. But what has become a very, very pervasive argument is the degree of the spreading. The unvaccinated persons have become this nidus and a source of continued spread and propagation of the virus. So more to think about, more to look at as persons make their decisions critically, and that has really tilted the scale in favor of vaccinating as many persons that can be vaccinated because of the Delta virus and how it is. And you see in our own experience the degree of household transmission fueled a lot by unvaccinated minors. So those are the considerations.
Mr. Rogers, you spoke about the budget. Sure. It would be more than the usual. In terms of the hospitalizations, does this put a strain on the hospital? And are there plans to get any more beds?
Of course, it puts a phenomenal strain on the hospital, not only in terms of supplies and resources, but also in terms of the capacity of the human resources to manage. As you know, we had to close Welch's Polyclinic, shift the staff to the hospital, and shift hospital staff to the isolation unit to run it 24 hours a day. So Welch's Polyclinic is still closed. And so these are the impacts we're having because we don't have enough staff to be able to run an isolation ward full-time while still running a general hospital full-time as well. So we are looking to recruit more nursing staff as well. We have been doing that for a while, but it's difficult when you're competing in an open market with other territories that pay what we're paying in the EC and US. When you're competing with the likes of the UK and the US and so forth, who give permanent residence and all kind of benefits for nurses to come. So it's difficult for us to compete in those regards, but we are looking at some possibility of getting some nurses from the Eastern Caribbean to shore up our level of staff. but we do have some human capacity right now. So yes, the impacts are great, and not only in terms of human resources, as I mentioned, but in terms of equipment and supplies. We have a oxygen generation plant that produces 10 bottles per day. In a normal year, that's fine. But there are some patients in isolation ward now who go to 5 bottles a day. In fact, and this is one patient who can go to 5 and 6 bottles a day. And we have 7 patients in the ward and still a general hospital to run. So in addition to us making 10 bottles a day in our oxygen generation plant, we have to now be buying oxygen from the private sector in Anguilla and St. Martin to keep up with the demand. So it is just a phenomenal increase in demand that we've had, and it's not only you're not going to see it in human resources, but we're going to see it in the bottom line as well at the end of the year. We just didn't anticipate this.
Dr. Andre mentioned that some officials from Public Health England will be coming in this evening. Could you speak to that as well as to the funding you referred to that the ministry received?
Sure, I'm going to let Dr. Aisha deal with that.
So they are doing the rounds in the UCOT. So it's nothing like when you're on the ground in person to contextualize the guidance. We have been speaking with them frequently for the past 6 years, you could say, before COVID. So we have our weekly meetings, but now there's an opportunity now and again for in-country visits, in-country missions to look at areas for technical support. Of course, COVID dominates for obvious reasons. So among the things we'll be discussing is strategies for schools, strategies for uniformed forces and that kind of things, shared experience, and the benefit of being on the ground and really contextualizing, because every UCOT is different. Cultures are different, resources are different. So we're looking forward to their visit. Also, there's an expert in terms of vaccines, and I think he'll be on Keith Stonegrave's show on Wednesday as well. So just a wealth of information and technical support, but that in-country presence, I believe, is invaluable to really make homegrown solutions. So we really look forward to welcoming them. We mentioned PAHO that gave us recently over 33,000 US. To support the public health response, really, and hire additional personnel for data entry, for responding administrative functions, giving people results, as Mr. Rogers said, contact tracing, and so on. At least 10 persons will be hired from those funds.
How many persons did you say will be coming in?
2 persons.
Oh, two.
Two consultants.
So Dr. Andre, we know CAFA just today launched their long social media campaign for health officials to report any severe side effects from the vaccine. Have we been reporting, and what some of the effects are we hearing about?
Well, we have a network. We always report side effects, but severe, thank God, to date, none, knock on wood. But yes, again, CARFA is an ongoing conversation. We're in the same chat groups and everything, so it's just a formalizing and a streamlining of the process, you know.
You said that you were going into workplaces to do more testing. My question is, and I've asked it before, but I'm not ashamed to ask it again because it needs to be asked. The government had said a long time ago that frontline workers had to be fully vaccinated. Well, they're not. We know they're not. Are they the ones that you're going to be testing, the people who are not vaccinated? And will they have to pay for those tests? Because we're going to be getting more and more tourists in, and it could be a really dangerous situation in a hotel if many of the workers are infected. The hotel wouldn't be able to run.
Yeah, this is just a reality, and what we're talking about is the rapid tests. We won't be expecting persons in those large to be dealing with the PCR tests. So what we're trying to do is to allow those institutions to be able to do some quick testing periodically to get a sense of what's happening in and amongst their staff, and then we can also always follow up on PCR tests. But I think this is critical for us to get a good grapple with the issues. And you're right. We, on a normal basis, and I keep saying this, we have not been allowing the number of tourists to come in to sustain the economy, right? This probably will be the first November since COVID started that we may open up to a point where this is probably the first time we see a large number of people coming in since COVID started. So we'll be keeping our eyes open as well to see what's happening, trends and so forth. But we've trained our hotel workers. We've trained them very well. and we're hoping they can look and keep the training in mind. The things we used to do, we do them no more. I mean, it's like you're now saved. You know, you sing that song, the things we used to do, we do them no more. Post-COVID, the things we do, we do them no more. We can't hug like we used to hug before. We can, be up in people's face and laugh and like we used to do before. We have to be able to keep our masks on in certain conditions and keep our social distancing to ensure that we protect ourselves, protect our families, and protect the product. Right? So it's going to be a combination of making sure that we have those periodic tests to ensure that we keep our eye on what's happening.
But I have to make a plug for the basics. Again, people were showing up to work with symptoms and belligerent in some cases about getting tested and not wanting to go home. We had a couple of sticky situations there, so there's a lot to do even before that with basic common sense and basic public health to say, look, tighten up your workforce policy and look at persons coming in and don't have persons coming into your place with symptoms. It happened, every single workplace exposure was a symptomatic person.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that before. If you have sniffles, if you're sneezing, if you're coughing, let's assume it's COVID. Please, stay home. Come get tested, do something. It is not worth your while to go into office with these symptoms and possibly infect an entire workplace and have that entire business shut down. There are cases now where we've had to shut down businesses because there is staff and that's positive. So if you have sniffle and you're sneezing and so forth, please get to a point where you get tested before you go back to work. Contact the hotline, contact the ministry. Assume that that's what you have. Because 9 out of 10 times, that's what you have. This is just the reality nowadays. So we have to ensure that we not only protect ourselves, but protect the people we work with, protect their families, and protect your business that you work for. Because it doesn't make sense for you to go to work and infect everybody. That business is shut down for 2 weeks. Now they have to start back up, and they're now 2 weeks later, and they can't bring everybody back on because they've lost so much money. And we want to assure you that yes, the Ministry of Health does know what it's doing. There are some people who are going to get a longer quarantine period than other persons because exposures are different. We may have given some people a different quarantine period than other people, but yes, there's a reason for that. And I think there's one person who would have mentioned to me the other day that they don't understand what's happening because their child was in a class with a child that was positive, but their child did not test positive initially, but we still quarantined that child. And the mother was mad. But at the end of the 10 days, we tested the child, and the child was positive. Had we not quarantined that child would have been positive out in the community, possibly spreading. So we want you to bear with us. We know it's difficult, but yes, there are reasons, and all exposures are not equal. All exposures are not equal. So we go through the process. That's why when we're asking for contact tracers, we want to have people who have some basic knowledge of the sciences, who we can, and if you don't have knowledge of the sciences, you have to be able to learn some concepts of disease transmission rather quickly, so we can share these things, so you can understand and be able to work with us. Yes. So if you have sniffles and sneezes and cough, and certainly if you cannot taste, that is a good indication that you have COVID.
Dr. Andrew, there were 2 questions that came into the radio station. Mr. Rogers answered one, so I will not go into that. But the second question coming in was, on day 4, there will be another follow-up test. Some tourists might opt not to go to the facility to be tested, or maybe they cannot be reached via telephone. What will the health team do to ensure follow-up tests are done?
No, the health team does a lot of field work. At the bigger resorts, when you have a sizable group, that's what we do. They start from 7 in the morning sometimes. So that's been established, and it's about scheduling and knowing who we're supposed to test. So that's something we've been doing and arranging.
Let me assure you, the persons in hotels, they're not a problem. We do not have problem finding people who sleep in hotels and testing them. That has never, ever been a problem.
I want to thank you very much. I said it was everything COVID, and that taken up a good bit of time, but this is important. This is where we are right now. COVID has taken over the world, and we have to do these things as discussed to get us back to near normalcy as possible. So take the admonitions, the advice, and the recommendations of the health team, and if they ask you to show up to get tested, then it's necessary. Also, be careful. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Premier. One other point. We will be changing our testing regime at the ministry. We are going to begin testing, a drive-through testing beginning midweek. So you wouldn't have to come out of your cars. We are setting up some tents at a parking lot to the back of the Caribbean Commercial Center. You drive through that back road that the minister recently paved. So you enter down there by Merchants Market. So you come through that side and you come to the western gate to the back of the Caribbean Commercial Center. When you drive in there, you'll see 3 big tents. 2 of them you can drive under, and 1 is for the testers and the persons who are going to be operating with reagents and so forth. So you will not have to come out of your cars. You drive through, we take your swabs, then you can drive out through the Caribbean Commercial Center, back to the main road, and you leave. So it's going to be a one-way in and one-way out. So we're hoping to begin that midweek. We already had a tent set up over the weekend, and now we begin to, at least over the next day or 2, set up ourselves so we can begin drive-through testing on Wednesday morning. It's going to be $100 for the PCR test, but we are going to reduce the price for the antigen test to about, I think, $50 or $55. We'll get back to you on that. Yes. So we're actually providing you more services for the same price, right?
Yes, good afternoon. In terms of the booster test, the booster vaccine that will be available, is it going to be a 1-shot or is it still a 2-shot deal for that?
It's a 1-shot.
Okay. And it doesn't matter what vaccine you've had before?
Well, for us in Anguilla, it's going to be the 2 AstraZenecas, because all we administered in Anguilla were the AstraZeneca. Mm-hmm. So we will not be giving boosters to persons who were not part of our protocol.
Okay, thank you. And just a comment, I think the mask wearing is important, but I do wish that we would really enforce it. Persons who wear them would really wear them the way they're supposed to and assume that everybody is positive. And this goes for, high officials as well, and people you would think would have the sense to wear it. They publicly don't wear it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I think that's very important. People know now they should cover their nose and mouth, and that in areas where they can't social distance, that they need to wear the mask, and that it is mandatory, and there's fines involved of $2,500 per infraction. We'll hear a little bit more of that from the commissioner, but I want to thank the health team. You have another question, Dawn?
I do. I was just wondering if anyone's been charged yet.
Just want to know if we're done with the health team so they can go off to do some other important business. Thank you. I agree. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming out. Thanks for doing the great job you do, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks. Just want to say that Lloyd had to leave. He had a previous 3 o'clock appointment. I think the commissioner also did, but I heard his clock alarming. But, I think it was important that we got the health team to give us all that information, including the new protocols. And also, Felicia, you asked a good question about the budget, because that tends to fly by people don't understand that the cost to providing the services and to mitigating, to control the spread of the disease. And there are things that we can do as a people to mitigate by mask wearing, social distancing, doing the hygiene measures, getting vaccinated. This is our own personal responsibility. So when I see things out there where they're saying, oh, the government has thrown their hands up and they have lost the plot, I just smile to myself, because we have given all opportunities for people to help us in this fight. If there are no other questions, I'll turn to the commissioner so that he can give us an update, and if you have specific questions for him, he is willing to answer. Thank you.
So just a very quick, broad overview, and I will be fairly brief here. Certainly since the new sets of health regulations came in, which are very much about premises and patrons going to those premises, we've been visiting on a reasonably frequent process, really, and our focus has very much been on warning and informing rather than prosecutions. And that's the big shift, really. It's very much about warning people and informing people. So I haven't actually got the up-to-date data, and I can explain why in a minute. But actually, we've found very good compliance overall. People are pretty good at, once we advise them, they've been pretty good, and actually the premise owners have been good, and the patrons have been pretty good as well at managing their premises. Certainly the last week or so, we've been slightly short on staff, again, because of quarantine. So we had a couple of cases in the police, so we've had the effects of quarantine within the force, so we've had to pull back a little bit. But essentially, since we've been doing it, we found about 40% of the premises that we go into, there's one or more people, generally one or two people, who are not generally compliant. That's generally about not staying far enough apart. We've given them the warning and the informing, and they've generally altered their behaviours. There's been no real need to prosecute them. So we've taken a very slightly different approach to the one we took at the beginning of the year, which was a very robust enforcement process. But this phase is different. You've heard the paradigm shift now. The island has got to open up, and people are pretty much very good at complying. So 40% premises sounds a big number, but actually these premises have got lots of people in sometimes. So actually, although 40% seems a big number, it's actually a small number in terms of the people who are actually sometimes forgetting. So I think we've taken a much more tolerant approach this time round. You heard from the health team there about 11%, 10% of all the transmissions done through social spaces. So we are definitely into the warning and informing part of this rather than the pure enforcement part. And we've moved away from that heavy enforcement because it's not as important at this point in time. Whereas early in the year, compliance was absolutely critical, and we took a much more robust approach. I think that's really overall my update, I think, for this particular part of the meeting.
Just a question. I asked the Premier, and he said I should defer to you. So the warning versus, being more strict, does that mean that no one has been fined yet for not wearing a mask?
Nobody's been prosecuted for them. The fine, obviously, the fining comes through the court process, and the court cases are going on. But I'm not citing the court cases. And quite simply, I'm not citing the court cases because we reduced our staff last week and the prosecution team were closed down, so I haven't actually got the data.
Any other questions? Certainly there have been other cases filed, including those who broke quarantine, those who did not follow the guidance of the health team. So these are things that we have to be mindful of, that if you were told to quarantine, then you stay in quarantine. If you're told to isolate because you're positive, then you have to isolate. And if you're seen out, you'll be put in government facility, which could include Her Majesty's prison. So if there are no other questions for the Commissioner, I'll thank him for his patience and for being here and for the good work he's doing to keep us safe. We certainly know that he also has the task of keeping the borders safe, to protect the south side of the island and prevent illegal entries. And that's something that has taken up a lot of resources and time, and we should be able to avoid that as conscientious citizens. And so I'd like to appeal to the Anguillan public and to those listening on the south side, in our neighboring islands, there are processes for being able to go back and forth with the proper testing and the proper surveillance. You have to be cleared to come into Anguilla through the portal, and if you come in otherwise, you will be arrested and boats confiscated. So this is a serious business, COVID-19. Make it easy for the Royal Anguilla Police Force and the Commissioner so that he can continue to serve and protect. All right, Commissioner, I think.
Thank you very much.
For you. Thank you. We'll now be joined by our Minister for Social Development and Education and Minister for Natural Resources, Economic Development, Information Technology. And what I'm going to ask in the interest of time, since the hour is moving on, is that if you have any questions for any of our ministers, whether tourism, infrastructure, the Constitution, Home Affairs, Education, the schools, social development, the obliteration of our budget for medical treatment overseas, which was gone by February. These are the things that we are faced with, and also the anything, what projects are on stream or coming. Please, you can ask any questions. I'll tell you that the policy-based loan from the Caribbean Development Bank for the $20 million that we signed off on that with the policies that were presented, approved by the United Kingdom government. And we are working currently on the budget for 2022. And that's where we are in the Ministry of Finance. So I'll open up the floor to any questions for any of the ministers. Thank you.
My question is for the Minister of Natural Resources, IT and Commerce. Could you tell us about the business loan, the Business Amendment Act that is supposed to come to the House pretty shortly?
Thank you for the question. So we would have done several consultations on the new Business License Act. It was scheduled to go to the House before we took our break, but we needed to make a few more amendments that would satisfy the EU counterparts. So now that we are off of our break, then we'll be taking it to the House for the first reading, I think, at the next sitting. And thereby, after that, we'll be taking it for the second and third reading afterwards.
A question for the Minister of Home Affairs. People are asking how many work permits have been given to Aurora Resort, because they seem to have needed to buy a property to house these people. And the other complaint I'm hearing is, why were they allowed to do that when people in Anguilla want to rent out to the overseas chefs, etc., who are coming in? That is the usual case. They usually rent from local people. Can you answer those two together?
Well, in terms of your first question, thank you for the questions. So when the property was acquired by Mr. Schultz, there was a need to bring the property up to a standard that could be opened. And as such, they have been bringing in a number of short-term consultants. Some persons coming for 2-3 weeks, some people coming for 2 months, and that has been necessary to get the property up and running. These persons have all had to have work permits under the law, and so the large number that you're referring to, Brenda, are not a year permits. They are all very short term, and they range from a couple of weeks, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months.
That explains it very well, if it's short term. It's
Short
good for
term.
people to know that it's just for short term people, because obviously
Yes.
they're not going to rent.
Right, but I will also say on the flip side of that as well, hundreds of Anguillians are also being employed on the project. So we had consultants coming in, but we've had a tremendous number of Anguillians employed on the property. I mean, they are really scrambling to get the property open, you know, and there's been a mammoth task, I must say, but I'm happy to see that the employment opportunity for Anguillians have been very pronounced, yes. What was the other question, sorry? Offhand, I could get that for next week, but like I said, it's for the longer term work permits. I must be very clear on this, and this has been a stipulation for quite some time. When those positions come up, they are advertised, and if an application is made for a work permit, there has to be a listing supplied to us of all the persons that would have applied and the reasons why perhaps someone was not suitable. And again, this kicks in with our understudy program as well. So that is very clear, and Brenda, we do not grant work permits willy-nilly. It's a methodology to it, and we only grant them when there is a non-availability of local resources to fill that position. But saying that, there's also the mandate that somebody must be put in place to acquire the necessary skills.
Okay, thanks.
Question for the Minister of Education. I think the health folks said that about 200 students are currently registered to take the vaccine out of 15 to 2,000 students. So you're talking less than 30% right now. Is there a percentage that you're looking at for vaccinations before you reopen, or before the secondary school, the primary schools are reopened?
Thank you for that question. The vaccination that the health team was referring to would be for high school students. So it wouldn't have a direct bearing on the primary school students because those would be under the age of 12. For the high school students, 12 to 17, we would like to see everybody vaccinated. We know that that's probably not going to be the likelihood at the moment. But the Department of Education, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Health have put together a package to go out to parents, to do some outreach to parents to kind of to address their concerns, because a number of them would have been hearing matters such as what Mrs. Hennis Hill would have addressed earlier. And there would have been a number of other speculations that would have been attached to the vaccine that we have decided to have some PTAs. The PTA, which we discussed, will take place tomorrow evening to try to educate and bring greater awareness to parents as to what are the salient facts in relation to the vaccine for their children, and to encourage them to get their children vaccinated. Because we know that the real crisis that's occurring in Anguilla and around the world is to education. I visited the schools at the beginning of the year in October. It would have been October we reopened. And it was really sad. After I spoke to a number of teachers said they really needed the kids to come back in classroom because engagement levels have been very, very low. And when you put this in perspective, when you have children who are 5 years old in kindergarten and in first grade, that is the time in their lives when they are learning the most. They're most active in the learning process. And when you have had a large portion of their structured educational environment where they have a routine being disrupted by something like this pandemic, it does have a severe impact on the development of education in Anguilla and in the long run on our human resource. We always talk about Anguilla's one resource being our human capital. Well, right now, our human capital is not being developed. And as the health team talked about earlier when we were talking about personal responsibility, everybody taking it upon themselves to keep themselves and their families safe, this is what I'm talking about. Because the actions and the way we behave as private citizens is having an impact on children. And it's frustrating, and I have to say that it's very frustrating thinking about the impact that it's having on children, that we're having children about to sit examinations, that we have young children who will not have access to resources the way some children will. We have parents who may have money, who may be able to pay for laptops, who may be able to pay for teachers, private tutors, but that's not the case for every child. It's not equal access for everybody. And it is frustrating because people might be speaking from their positions of privilege, what they have access to, but that's not the case for everyone. And so, as a community, we have to bear some of the responsibility. It's not an easy situation, of course. I know that it's not easy. I know that it's a complicated situation for everyone, but we all have to play a part. So when we're talking about vaccination for our children, how to make decisions, I don't want to sit here and just encourage, and then tomorrow at the PTA, nobody shows up or nobody engages. If you don't equip yourself with the information, how can you make informed decisions? You have to show up. You have to engage. It's not just education's role to keep education going. It's everybody. Education is about all the stakeholders. You can't have a successful education system with just children or just teachers. Parents have to be a part of it. So I want all of us to take proactive steps to really help us in education. We're depending on a lot. We're depending on the entire situation on the island. So as it relates to your question, going back to it, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that I do want to encourage all parents of children within the ages of 12 to 17 to really take the time to inform themselves, especially if they have children who have underlying conditions. We've heard from the health team that those who are at risk of more serious illness and maybe long COVID would be those who have diabetes, which we know that our children also do have a high rate of diabetes, and also high cholesterol and other non-communicable illnesses. So it's very important for us to try to make decisions based on what's in the best interest of our children in a holistic sense. So I do want to encourage everybody to please listen in, please make an informed decision, because it's very important to get our children back out to school. We don't have unlimited resources to put air purifiers in every classroom. Air purifiers are very expensive. I heard somebody ask that question before. If somebody wants to donate, you are welcome to do so. The Department and Ministry of Education we always have our hands open. And I know teachers are always asking, always fundraising. So I would like everyone to make a joint effort with me in this fight to get education back and in schools. Thank you.
I have a couple questions, but I have a question from Ms. Kentish Rogers. In terms of, we are speaking on education, we know that they had the CXC ceremony in Guyana. I think Dr. Wesley, the CXC official, he made mention about young people being equipped for today's world, not necessarily the traditional education. But my question is, though, I know many persons have been critical of CXC in terms of the CCLC. Many persons do not find that it make any sense. So I'm just wondering, I know you've spoken about no child left behind, strengthening the education system. Going forward, how do we prepare our students, our young people for the various jobs in terms of being qualified, when in fact some places, I'm not sure if it's acceptable in the public sector, if we accept CCLC subjects, and what happens in the private sector?
That's a really good question. We definitely have, okay. We definitely have a responsibility to equip our children for the future of work, and as many international education conferences would have said, the children who are in school today, they're preparing for jobs that don't exist yet, which means the skills, it's more about skills and subjects. It's more about teaching our children how to learn, how to adapt, rather than just saying they have English or maths. It's about how do you apply what you've learned to the environment that you're now living in. And so I've met with OECS, the ministers of education across the region, last week, and we spoke about CXC, CCSLC, and the regional examinations, and how do we engage in CXC as the main stakeholders to make the assessments more suitable for the world of work in the future and for what children will have to face in the future, because we acknowledge that things are changing at a very rapid pace. We are looking at seeing how we can implement more project-based learning based on the skill, the project collaboration. We know they talk about the 5 C's, the essential competencies in education: communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking. And all of those are essential skills. So what we want to do is use project-based learning to develop those skills out of our students. We would have started with certain programs at the primary school level, but we want to make sure that that's going across the system. So that is something that we are looking at a regional level. At the local level, we have been having conversations with CXC, Dr. Wesley included. We've been speaking to him and interceding with him about how CXC should operate given the challenges of COVID-19. One of the challenges we have here in Anguilla is that we didn't start this term. Term 1 is usually called our teaching term. That's when most of the teaching happens. Next term, there's sports, there's usually a lot of extracurricular activities. But unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 outbreak, we've had massive interruptions to the foundation term, quote unquote. So that's going to require some changes going forward in terms of what next year will look like, and what the rest of the year will look like. And of course, this is putting a lot of demands on our teachers, who are also parents, who also have kids, who also are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. We all have to take a very holistic approach to this. So it's not about change overnight, especially in the education system. This is about structural change, and structural change always takes more time. It is a labor of love. So I definitely see what you're saying, and I agree that we do need to take a proactive role in preparing our children for the world of work in the future. But right now, we also need to take a very a step back to focus on the fundamentals, given the changes that we're facing.
I have a question for Mr. Hughes, Minister of Energy. Mr. Hughes, I understand that there's an issue regarding the environmental levy. It's understood that this is something that government collects from ANGLEC, and now it's understood that the management wants to withhold those taxes due to the fact that the government owes ANGLEC X amount of money.
Thank you for your question. That is not the case. Any issues relating to, or perceived issues relating to the environmental levy has already been squared away between the Ministry of Finance and the Anguilla Utility Company. But I do like that moniker, Minister of Energy.
No, I'm just asking.
One of the online posters who have made the claim that the vaccinated teachers have been spreading COVID. That is untrue. And I would hope that people are more responsible in their pronouncements, especially on public forums.
Dr. Webster, I don't know if you want to speak to government's finances. The House resumes sometime next week. Can you tell us what we can expect?
Certainly the House, the plan is we have asked Her Excellency, the Governor, to resume the next session of the House on the 9th of November. And at that time, I will be giving a presentation on the legislative agenda for the upcoming session, and the Leader of the Opposition will be able to respond. So I don't want to jump the gun and give you any of my good points yet, but next Tuesday the House will, if Her Excellency allows, the House will be open and we'll have a session then on the 9th of November. I just want to say that, the Joint Ministerial Council in London is going to be from the 15th to the 19th of November, and I will be attending at that time along with the leaders of the other overseas territories. That will involve joint sessions and also bilateral sessions with the Minister for the Overseas Territories, who is now the Right Honourable Amanda Milling, Member of Parliament. And we look forward to having some good meetings and good discussions, which will also include replacement of the EDF funding, which Anguilla participated in when we were part, through the UK, of the European Union.
Can I ask, please, when you get the agenda for the main meetings and when you have an agenda for your bilateral meetings, can the press be informed, please?
Brenda, you're well informed. Yes, I'll be going, and the parliamentary secretary, who is now in Glasgow, she will be joining me in London, where we will be, discussing. Certainly, environmental concerns have to come up, since the overseas territories represent over 90% of biodiversity for the United Kingdom. So, these are important discussions in terms of financing, mitigation, climate control, climate equity, and climate justice. And so these are all important things that will be discussed. Mental health, economic resilience, border security. And so I'll get you the agenda once it's finalized.
Minister of Home Affairs, Mr. Hodge, we know the constitutional exercises recently concluded. Could you tell us what are the next steps? And we also know that the issue of same-sex have been one of the most contentious issues. You also mentioned during that time that the government is seeking to get the input from the young people in terms of debating this particular matter. But can you give us any update on constitutional affairs in Anguilla?
Okay, yes, thank you, Felicia. We did have a very, I call it bruising 7 weeks. We went around each week into each of the 7 districts, and that was deliberate. I continue to say it because it provided a platform for persons to come out and provide their input And so when persons are now saying that they didn't get opportunity, I said, but where were you for the past 7 weeks? But nonetheless, the turnouts were not great, but I would say the feedback has been tremendous. Because persons would have watched the lives in the hundreds, people have been feeding back emails to us, comments. We had a very good session a couple of Saturdays ago with Apony. That went extremely well. And the next steps forward, the PS is on vacation, or well on vacation, I must add. When he returns in the next week or so, we will be collating the various comments that would have been received over the past number of weeks, and then we'll be sitting down with the main constitutional committee to sort of feed into the new information. And after that, we will be utilizing the services of the AG's chambers to put a new draft in place that would encapsulate what has been there before plus what we're going to be adding to the list. Yes, same-sex has been an issue, but at the end of the day, as I keep saying, we want to hear the views of everybody. So we have heard very vigorously from the Evangelical Association. We haven't heard much from other sectors. We haven't heard from the Muslim community or other sectors as well. So there is still time. Emails are still coming in. We want to see the young people get involved in it. So yes, we have written to the Youth Parliament asking for them to have a special sitting, youth sitting, to discuss same-sex marriage. And we'll be looking at involving the young people because they have their particular views as well. And we want to hear those. So it's a lot of exciting times ahead for us. But as of now, my PS, and I must publicly thank him because he would have done the necessary research. Every week he came out with presentations. He did a phenomenal job, and for me personally, I have learned so much over those past 7 weeks. And I must thank him for his input, and also to thank GAF, Titanium Sounds, for providing that platform, audio, visual, and streaming. So all of those presentations are there live for persons to go back and review.
I know we are coming up to the hour. I just have 2 quick questions. Mr. Hughes, can you give us an update on the road projects thus far? And what is the next big project? I know the Valley Road will take some time, but you can tell us about the roads, the side roads that you've completed, and any other project that is in the pipe work.
And so just to piggyback on what you spoke to, as you know, last week the tenders were open for the heavy equipment and the construction phase of the Valley Main Road. And as you can see, as you drive through the area, there are some detours, and that is due to ongoing works by the Public Utilities Company, underground works to move the pipes and lines from one side of the road to the next side of the road. As you know, 3 of the 4 roads, side roads have been completed. The Permanent Secretary of Health spoke to one of them that is being used as a detour that leads from Merchants Market into the Carteret Boulevard, but also those roads that leads from the George Hill Highway into the Jeremiah Gums Highway that passes branches of London that has also been completed, and the Spring Path Bypass Road. There's only one that is outstanding. But while that is the case, we also recognize that during the construction of the Carteret Boulevard, there'll be need to divert traffic through the valley area past the Anguilla Tourist Board and into the Queen Elizabeth Avenue. So right now we are doing the surveying to fix that road so that you can have an easement. During the underground works by Anglic, we had to divert traffic, and that road is in really terrible shape. There's a dirt road that leads on to the valley from the Queen Elizabeth Avenue. So that is in very bad shape. So that's where we are with roads. To note, we are also doing some preliminary work on the surveying and design of the road that leads from the South Hill through past the Louis Price Gym and into the Jeremiah Gums Highway. So preliminary works are ongoing as it relates to that particular road. And I believe that is it for now with roads.
To continue on with roads, when will you begin to look at, I'm assuming there's going to be a new road structure to go into the new high school that's being built? Because right now there's just like one access road, So
That is all part of the road development, and the Minister of Education can perhaps speak to that, if you don't mind.
Sorry, this is the road that's leading past Omololu? The road that's leading past Omololu? That's what you're speaking, yes. There was supposed to be an access road leading out the back of the high school towards Carl's Bottom, into Carl's Bottom. But due to resource limitations, they may not be able to complete that road. So it may be limited to that one access road, but they're looking at ensuring that the flow of traffic is reasonable, given the amount of people who will be using that road in the coming future.
Dr. So my final question, while government was on break, there were a number of allegations thrown in the public domain, and one of those in particular were ministers of government bringing in guns. I know your administration is big on transparency. What can you tell us about those allegations?
I think for the most part, the allegations, and I don't want to just keep rehashing these things. I don't really feel that there's a significant relevance to that. And, we have been assured by the Commissioner of Police and the Royal Anguilla Police Force that the threat level is low, and we are guided accordingly. Thank you.
I just wanted to say before Minister.
No, go ahead. Ladies always first.
I just wanted to say before we wrapped up that I wanted to take a moment to give thanks to the Anguilla Progressive Association of New York, APNE. They've been doing a lot of work with the Ministry of Education and Social Development. We partnered on a program with the Schultz Foundation for the provision of laptops and devices. And that is now finally towards its end, and we'll be able to get the laptops ordered and delivered to Anguilla for distribution. So I want to give a special thank you to both APNE and the Schultz Foundation for laptops and electrical devices for students.
I just wanted to give a quick update on American Airlines and KP and the like. As you know, starting December, they'll be running a direct service out of Florida into Anguilla. And to that end, we recently signed a contract with Larson's Construction to retrofit, to do some upgrades to the Clayton J. Lloyd International Terminal to ensure that the desk space, the counter space, and all of that will be sorted out. And also, we'll be importing some seating to facilitate the passenger movements, as we anticipate a real upward tick in passenger movements through the Clayton J. Lloyd International Airport. Larson's Construction. Larson Construction, L-W-A-S-O-N, Larson's Construction. And as you know, the Blowing Point Ferry Terminal has already commenced construction down there. Blocks are laying, concrete is pouring, and things are going well.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you all. The Minister of Energy, he should be called the energetic minister.
Before we close, I just want to place on public record our gratitude and commendation to the fire department. Over the weekend, there was some fishermen who were lost at sea, St. Martin fishermen, and they were able to rescue them out of in the area of Sombrero Island. The fishermen ran out of fuel, and they collaborated with the U.S. Coast Guard, St. Martin officials, and we were able to rescue them and bring them safely to Anguilla. So I just want to place on record that the boat, the rescue boat is in action, and the fire department has done a good work, and they cannot come down.
And just maybe one more public recognition will go out to the under-17 Anguilla footballers who are currently playing for Anguilla. I want to congratulate them. It's hard work going out there, trust me. I live through it, and I spend my lunch times watching their games. Today they had a game against Honduras, but these are the building stages of developing football in Anguilla, so I wish them all the best, and they have our full support. And our male footballers are supposed to be going away soon, so we want to encourage people to continue to support them because it does make a difference.
Yeah, just to say that I'll give a thorough update next week. I came prepared to give some updates in different areas, but we were here since 2 o'clock. But, you know, I'll provide an update next week, so thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for your patience and for coming out. Welcome to Dr. Joy, representing the Anguillan. She's a new media person, so we appreciate that. I want to thank everyone. Ministerial assistant and the Ministry of Social Development and Education. He's not here today. He was otherwise tied up, but know that he'll be here next week. They asked me to congratulate Hassan Hennis on signing a pro cycling contract. Awesome. All right. We wish him well. You know, I know that he's been representing Anguilla all around, even down under in Australia and New York. And so we congratulate him. And Anguillians are doing well in Anguilla and outside of Anguilla and representing this little rock very well. You know, we got our athletes. We have other professionals. And we encourage all Anguillians to come back because we want to increase our population. And first, we'd like Anguillians who are out there to bring their skills back to Anguilla. And then we'll extend that to our Caribbean brothers and sisters and then to the wider world. But we congratulate all Anguillians who are making us proud. And that seems to always be the case. So thanks again for coming. We look forward to seeing you again next week. And if we haven't tired you out too much today, next week we'll try to stay within the hour. And, you know, it's a pleasure. I want to thank the ministers, ministerial assistants, our liaison for the Spanish communities, PRO, Youth Media, and of course Dites, Lloyd, who had to leave early. Thanks again, and we'll be here again next Monday, and every Monday, unless it's a holiday, we plan to come out and speak to you and allow you to know what's happening in the country, and you ask your questions. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless Anguilla.